Lauren's going to introduce our guest speaker.
All right, the guest speaker for today is Mr. Tony Kamus. He is the Senior Funeral Director at the Beyers Funeral Home and Crematorium. He is a longtime member of the Village's Honor Flight, one of the first directors, I believe. He's going to be speaking to us on the process for identifying, repatriating remains for our service members who were lost in combat over the years. He's going to speak specifically about Staff Sergeant Hall, a World War II soldier who was lost in combat, whose remains were recently identified and in the process of being brought back for a funeral later this month. And also with him is Mr. Jeff Hester, who is Staff Sergeant Hall's nephew. So, Tony?
Thank you, Lauren. Before I begin, I just want to say one word. Wow. You guys are great. Who knows, except for Lisa, who knows where Village's Honor Flight started and what month and year? Anybody have an idea? Actually, it started in September of 2010. I was at the October 2010 meeting, which was meeting number 2. We met at Mission Oaks out on 301 in Oxford. A lady from the hub in Ocala, Allison Metcalf, was leading us at that time. And we had a big goal to rent or to acquire one aircraft to fly over 100 veterans, plus guardians, plus support staff to Washington, D.C. That was how we started. We couldn't meet that goal. It was very challenging. We had changes in leadership, and the small group of about a dozen of us that were meeting, some of them, those ladies came to me and said, would you be willing to take over as our leader and chair of Village's Honor Flight? And I did. So we contacted the national organization. They came down and helped us. We were meeting at Tierra del Sol. We actually also met after that at Perkins on 466. Anybody know where Perkins used to be? It's now Metro Diner. We used to meet there for our leadership meetings. Mark Erdrich, all of you know, came on board pretty significantly in 2011. And as we determined how to build this organization, it became a full-time job for me. Already had a full-time job. I didn't need a second one. So Mark and I co-chaired Honor Flight for a while. And then as it got super busy, unfortunately, I had to pull back because I just didn't have the time to make the part-time, full-time commitment. And Mark took over the reins and obviously brought this along to where it's at today. So all I can say is, when I see these checks, we could have been elated at $250 donation. $3,300, that's just awesome. $25,000, I mean, we could not have handled that. The only way we got the first flight off the ground is National helped us with Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines donated the first 25 tickets for our veterans to get on the aircraft to fly to D.C. The Guardians, like they do today, paid their way. But that's how we got off the ground and got going. Those of you who do fundraising, I was out there, I was speaking to different groups, and I know it's fun, but it's a challenge, but you guys have come a long way. So I applaud you. Give yourself just give yourself a warm round of applause because you guys have done a great job and are doing a great job. I appreciate all the time, effort, resources that you put into this. It's my privilege and honor to just share with you a little bit about what we're doing. This is Mr. Jeff Hester. As he was introduced, he is the nephew of Staff Sergeant Franklin Hall, whose remains were just recently identified from World War II KIA on a bombing mission in a B-24, coming back from their mission to bomb a V-1 rocket installation. They were shot down over France by a German fighter. When the aircraft crashed, the only survivor was the tail gunner. He gave an eyewitness report to his superiors at that time. Fortunately, the Germans were kind enough to bury the remains because everyone else on the aircraft was killed in a small cemetery. They buried them in a small cemetery just in that vicinity. The Army Graves Registration Commission did find those graves eventually, but some of the remains were unidentifiable, and Staff Sergeant Halls was one of them. They ended up moving those remains to Normandy, France, to the American Normandy Cemetery, where he was buried as an unknown. And then back in 2018, the DOD with another group, let me see what their name is, the American Graves Registration Command disinterred those remains, moved them to the Air Force Base in Nebraska, where they do this advanced DNA testing. And through that process, and through doing a lot of historical biographical research, they were able to track down family members here in Central Florida, which Mr. Hester is one of those. So I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about that process, and then I'm going to share with you what we're doing to welcome home Staff Sergeant Hall on the 20th and the 21st of January. So Jeff, go ahead and share with them.
First off, thank you very much for inviting us here to do this, and it is just astronomically amazing to see what a fine group of people we got here. Just totally great. Y'all give yourself another round of applause. This is just, I was never expecting to see this. I'm just a country boy. I was born here. I can't tell you I was from anywhere. I can't at all. I was born here, raised here. Yeah, my daughter says I'm going to die here. So the story of Franklin P. Hall is quite interesting. It is honestly one that comes from the heart. And did I know him? No, I did not. I have to say that right up front. Heard about him. He was, people asked me, well, was he your favorite uncle? I said, well, he could have been, but I don't really know. He was gone. He bored a hole in France probably 10 years before I was born. He was a waist gunner, left waist gunner on the Queen Marlene, as Tony said, after it bombed the V-1 site in northern France, was making his way back across the channel to England before it got to the channel. Focke-Wulf 190s tore it up. They apparently had a strafing run on it that took out the pilot and co-pilot. Plane did a wing over, and down it went. The tail gunner, as he said, was the only person that exited the plane and provided a great amount of information. And the Germans did take the remains that were there. The plane did burn when it hit, and they were buried in a little cemetery not near Equins. I hope I get that right. And they were buried in a small cemetery in Poix, northern France. And they were looked for and looked for and looked for. And in 1951, my mother and her other two brothers were notified that Franklin was no longer recoverable. Science wasn't available at that time as we have it now. And things kind of went on. Now, yeah, we heard about it in holidays and patriotic occasions and stuff. Well, you think they'll ever find Franklin? You think they'll ever find Franklin? Now, his brother was also a Purple Heart recipient in Germany. He took some shrapnel in fighting with a tank group in northern Germany. And his other brother was also a veteran. So they were all interested. They were all caring, all wanting to know. Well, I think I started hearing about this in 2017 or early 2018. The DOD department, which is the Department of Defense, KIA, MIA, agency is looking so hard all the time, never has let up, and is still pulling information constantly, which we never knew, and had held meeting after meeting after meeting after trial after trial after trial, and been researching these flights that had gone down in France and Germany after these bombing runs. And they did find that the Queen Marlene was one they needed to research and find out, because the entire crew was missing. It did go down in one spot. They wanted to find it. Well, they went after it. They found it in this cemetery. Boy, it was marked. It was marked unknown. They didn't know what was there. But they excavated that grave, and they did some forensics of that time, which was in 1944, 45, in that era. Ended up moving those bones at that time then back over to the Normandy Cemetery in France. And that's where they stayed. And then again, once again, in about 2018, I was contacted by the DOD and asked if I would submit my DNA. And my brother was contacted, would he submit his? And we did. And you're kind of thinking, well, I'll be dead and gone, but maybe somebody will get some results on this. Well, shoot, science is, don't do anything wrong now because they got you. They got you bad. So, I mean, bam, it was like this. There was it's run, the center for that is run out of Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I was working with a retired Air Force major by the name of Michael Meade. It's the Department of Defense POW MIA accounting agency. And I have flyers here that gives their timeline on what they do. You're welcome to take a look at these and see what you'd like to glean from the information on them. And they contacted me. Michael Meade was a mortuary officer in the Air Force, and then he went to work for the Army at Fort Knox and has been doing this for 12 years. Amazing gentleman, scientific, just unbelievable what he could help out in understanding the DNA process and everything that was going on with this. Well, it didn't take much longer as it got refined and refined and refined in Nebraska. We got more and more calls, and the next thing you know, you mind if we come to your house? We have findings. We have completion. It's amazing. So, the Army assigned, they have a casualty officer. In this case, it was Master Sergeant Mark Zapata. Came with Michael Meade at my house. We spent the entire day going over what had happened and what was going down and all that. And next thing you know, we needed to call Tony's group. This is getting serious. And we did. And the Army's been setting this up. The DOD's been setting this up. It's a repatriation beyond belief. Picking the remains up at the airport, unbelievable. It was fantastic. And it's going to be, the burial will be graveside at Lone Oak Cemetery, just over on the west side of Leesburg. It will be at 3 o'clock on January the 21st. So we're going to try to put him in the ground the minute to 80 years that he went down in that B-24 Liberator. So everybody's welcome for sure. There will be a parking problem. Guaranteed. And there's a lot of details about DNA that I just really can't grasp. I couldn't by any chance explain them to you, which bones they used, which categories they filled out, what are the ratios of matches and not matches, but it's just absolutely amazing what they can do. So, and if there's any questions, feel free to ask and I'll give it a stab. But that's where we're at, and it's just wonderful what's going on. And I'm going to turn this back over to Tony, and he's going to tell you what he's planning. He and Roger Beyers are kind of like the local gurus on this, setting it up, and we're going to do a Heroes Highway. And also, if there's questions that need answered, Master Sergeant Mark Zapata, he is an active duty Army Master Sergeant right now, and this is his detail. This is what he does, and he is very, very good at it. He's a 20-year Army veteran, and this was his last gig, he said, but he's got to do it right, and he's good. So, and my family is very proud. I got Marine Corps, I'm Navy Reserve, grandson's Coast Guard. What can I say?
Thank you, Jeff, and I just want to share with you, it's an extreme honor for myself and for Beyers Funeral Home to be able to participate in this final placement of Staff Sergeant Franklin Hall in his family plot at Lone Oak Cemetery. That's why we're not going to Bushnell or Arlington. He has other family buried in Lone Oak, so we're very honored to be able to do this. In my 52 years in funeral service, and I know I don't look that old, but in my 52 years in funeral service, I've handled a lot of services to Arlington, to all the national cemeteries throughout the country, and this is my first opportunity to repatriate a World War II KIA to his final resting place, so it's quite an honor. We were planning a Welcome Home Heroes Highway when he arrived last month in Orlando on Friday, December 15th. Unfortunately, the Army, through their contractor, scheduled the flight to arrive in Orlando at 6:30 in the evening. So by the time his remains were disembarked, honored at the airport, and then placed into the hearse, it was almost 7:30. That is not the time to do a Welcome Home Heroes Highway. So we've gone to Plan B, and this is what we're going to be doing. On Saturday, January 20th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., and I'm going to share a copy of this press release once I get final approval from Jeff and from Mr. Beyers. I'll share a copy of this with Village's Honor Flight so it can be put out in your email distribution. We're going to have Staff Sergeant Hall's remains lie in state at our Leesburg Funeral Home from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Why is that? Because he's a Leesburg son. He was born in Leesburg, went to Leesburg High School, and entered the service up in Stark, Florida at Fort Blanding. So we're going to honor him by having him lie in state on the Saturday before he's buried on Sunday. Then on Sunday, at our Lady Lake location, we're going to repeat the same schedule and have him lie in state at our Lady Lake Funeral Home from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. After which we will place him in the hearse, and there's going to be a tremendous escort of the Patriot Guard riders and American Legion riders and other organizations, and they're going to escort us down through Leesburg, down Canal Street. If you know a little bit about Leesburg, we're going to be on 441, pick up Canal Street, turn right. We're going to go down to Main Street. We're going to bring him through downtown Leesburg and then out to Lone Oak Cemetery. During the times of the lying in state, you can come into the funeral home. We invite you to do that, pay respects. You can sign a guest register. I'm going to have a card or a placard that's going to tell his story, show his picture. His casket with his remains will be flag draped in the chapel so you can pay your respects. We're going to have the small flags, the handheld flags. So if you want to participate on the Welcome Home Heroes Highway or at the cemetery, we'll provide you a flag to participate in that. But we invite all of you to come and participate in any and all of the events we have planned. So we just look forward to you doing that. So while we're here, I think Lauren said we could have a couple minutes for Q&A. Anybody have a question they want to ask either myself or Jeff? Did we do that good? Yeah. Are you all that sleepy? So we'll be up here afterwards. Yes, sir. Okay, the question was, were the other members in the aircraft also brought back? As I understand in reading the report, Jeff, do you want to speak to that? I'm going to let Jeff speak to that.
There's a crew of 10 on the B-24 Liberator, and 9 of the guys hit the ground and of course went to mess with the plane. The tail gunner did parachute out and provided the story. At this time, the pilot, co-pilot are the ones that are still listed as unaccounted for. The rest of the crew now is accounted for. And I'm hoping to keep contact with these folks up at Fort Knox and have asked them to let me know when and if they do make more remain discoveries. And the remains, I do believe, are there. A lot of it has to do with their ability to be able to get the DNA materials they need to study them. If any of y'all are medical people and all that, there's apparently certain bones and a certain amount of parts of the bone that they use to collect the DNA, and those samples are probably hard to come by sometimes, and also relatives at this point in time, 80 years later, are sometimes hard to acquire and get the DNA sample. But from that crew, right now, there are still the pilot, co-pilot, are ones listed as unaccounted for. Yes, ma'am.
How old was your uncle when
He was just shy of 21 years old.
A little bit of the identification process that kind of made it more difficult for the forensics. His remains were commingled in 2 or 3 other graves. So they had to take every bone fragment and identify it to match it to him. So you think about that with 2 or 3 graves with commingled remains, and they had to go through the DNA processing. This report that I'm holding in my hand is the compilation of probably 5 years of work to get to the day that we're here today to share this information with you. And I sat down for a couple hours and went through it. It's just tremendous, the work they did in order to bring Staff Sergeant Hall's remains to this point, identify it with Jeff and his brother, that we could now bring him home and give him the honors that he deserves. And if you'd like to see any of the report, Jeff says he'll have it here if you want to come and see us afterwards.
There is information in this packet and pictures. There's actually pictures of the bones. For those who are not disturbed by looking at them, I think it makes just a good statement. They did a great job. There's also information or contact information here that you could get online and get some more detailed information about this group and what they do and how hard they are working. So I'll be welcome to share any of that with you. The only copies I have of this is basically what I have as the originals, but anybody is welcome to make copies or jot down some information that I have.
Yes, sir.
Yes, a little background, what I've learned about the family is that they're the early founders of Leesburg. They came here in the 1840s, if I'm not mistaken, is that correct?
That's
The
correct.
Hesters and the Robertsons.
Hester's, Robertson's, Ward, and there's some other names in there. Start mentioning names, we're all going to be kin to them. So.
They were here before the Dagger. The name Leesburg is that. They're one of the earliest families in the
That's Mr. O'Kelly. Thank you, Mr. O'Kelly. That is very true, and it's all homegrown right here. Franklin is one of the old country boys from right here in this area, and it makes it really special. It really does.
Susan?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more? You said they spent the day with you when they came back and told you that they identified him. Can you talk a little bit more about how your day went? How the day was,
I can put it in just a couple of words. Overwhelming. This is one of them. Yeah, they called and said, we have reached a point. You have been nominated as a director since you're the first next to kin. And I said, well, I was in the military. I got family all through the military. We're very patriotic. Bring it on. We'll get it out there. And they were real happy with that, because that's a good question you asked. They have had some resistance. They've had claims that it's maybe not true. They've had claims that look, they're in the ground, leave them alone. I don't want them disturbed. And just a lot of different things that can be controversial in digging up bones. So they contacted me, and what I did was I actually kind of accelerated the thing. I invited them to breakfast, to meet for breakfast, and we kind of got acquainted beforehand, before the meeting. And when they came to the house for the meeting and started spreading this stuff out, it was just astronomical. And the fact that they were so detailed and so accurate in everything they did to provide every little bit of doubt that anyone would have, not a chance. If you're gonna fake something, you're not gonna go to this much trouble faking it. I'm sorry, it's just not gonna happen. But the Army Sergeant, Master Sergeant Zapata, he came in full dress uniform. And as a lot of you probably know, the Army has changed their uniform back to the old school browns and light browns. It's a beautiful uniform. And he was in full uniform, and they were very professional. Michael Lee was in a suit and tie. Everything they presented was accurate. I had some of my family there to witness some of this, and they basically went through, well, to go back a little bit, they had informed me over the years of what was coming up, that they were looking, that they were searching, they were finding bits and pieces, and like Tony mentioned, there was commingled bones. There are so many just little details about what went on with the X-graves and Normandy and digging them up and whether or not to dig them up and how far to go with it. It's just very, very interesting. And but they went through those details first and went through the whole story, and then they got into the DNA process that explained what bones they used, what relatives they used, and the samples and how they correlated with the counts of where the different DNA chromosomes came up, and the genealogy of in the pure science of just matching all this together and doing the math. And I pretty much went cross-eyed. It was just, it's just, a DNA scientist is an amazing creature. They really are. But the Master Sergeant, as he took it over as the Army's casualty administrator, he presented at that time, after the DNA discussion, he presented all of the medals, all of the documents, everything that was pertaining to Staff Sergeant Franklin P. Hall. And it was just quite amazing. Couple of little side notes on that. He did get a new Purple Heart and a new certificate. Well, I did some digging through my other uncle's stuff, and found Uncle Franklin's original Purple Heart, his original certificates and everything. So there was kind of an emotional going on there too. And then we also found, believe it or not, the original Western Union certificates and telegraphs that were sent to my mother. Originals. And we also found a 1944 daily commercial from Leesburg stated the missing in action of an airman. So since then, with the newspaper reports and all that, we now have a new copy of it. It's very interesting to see the difference. And of course, the price tag at that time was 5 cents.
I think there's a question over
Yes,
here.
sir.
Yeah, I was just wondering with the DNA that you were talking about, when they get it from relatives for a match, if I understand it right, they sometimes have to get it from your bone?
That's where they do get it from what I understand too. They gave the list of the bones that were involved in the sample. And that's where the concentrated DNA samples came from that gave them the information they needed. No, not it would be the sample bones.
Can you tell us just a little about him as a man? What was he like? I mean, he was a young boy, but like he graduated high school. What is the family,
Well, from the research I've done, of course, you know, I told you, I didn't know him. He was gone. But that didn't stop your relatives from telling you what Uncle Franklin was like.
Yes, exactly.
And another little side note there too is a family friend I finally got in touch with and talked to that is the only person I found that knew him, and it was Miriam Matthews of Leesburg. And she was 97 years old. She's still kicking around and still hanging in there. I think she's up living she's in Virginia and living with a retired military family there, Joe Galloway. And they live in Virginia. But he was born of a guy over here in Sumter County, Pleasant Elmo Hall, and he married Hilda. He married, let's see, how'd they go? Hilda Vaughn, and then that produced a whole string of youngins, which he was one of my mother. Franklin was the oldest. Milton was the next. My mother, Mary Julia, was then, and then Robert. So they had a pretty good sized family, and he attended Leesburg High School, and they lived on 1022 Line Street in Leesburg, which is almost right in downtown. And I've tried to find out as much as I could about his youth. I know quite a bit about Milton, I know quite a bit about Robert, and I know, of course, my mother. But Franklin, he was the oldest, and apparently from everything I found, got out of high school and went straight into the Army, went through airplane mechanics, and became with the 66 and 44th Bomber Group, and was a waist gunner in a B-24 Liberator, Queen Marlene, and ended up going to Europe in 44. And I wish I could tell you more. I really do. I really do.
I just want you to know that he did not come home without honors. When we went to the airport, he was met, as many of the honor flights are met, by water cannons from the fire department. So they gave him that honor as the aircraft approached the tarmac and the gateway. The Army was there, and they had 7 gentlemen to receive the casket off of the aircraft. Actually, one Army person went up into the aircraft, and when we fly human remains on an airplane, especially with a casket, they have to be in the protective cover. So they took the cover off of the casket in the cargo hold of the aircraft. So when the casket came down, it was flag draped. And the military, the Army Honor Guards actually received the casket as it came down the conveyor belt, and they pulverized the casket over to what we call a church truck, which is a device we roll the casket on. We gave family time just to kind of be able to assimilate and just have a time there on the tarmac to just appreciate and just get their emotions in check as far as what was going on. And then, excuse me, then the Army pulverized the casket into the hearse. As we left the airport, we had law enforcement escort from Orange County to the turnpike. We had a small contingent of motorcycle riders that actually escorted us up through the process. When we got to Lake County Sheriff's Office escorted us from the turnpike all the way up to the funeral home in Lady Lake. When we got to the funeral home, American Legion Post 347, if you remember that, thank you. Their honor guard was present. They did a flag line, and they pulverized the casket from the hearse into the funeral home. So he received honors, even though we couldn't do the Welcome Home Hero Highway. He received honors as we received him and brought him back to Lady Lake. Yes, and through this whole process, before he left Omaha, was where he departed from, there is an Army escort that has to remain with the remains throughout the duration of the transportation from the departing airport to the funeral home. So we had an Army escort that was with us the whole time, and he rode in the hearse with the hearse driver from the airport all the way back to the Lady Lake Funeral Home.
And I'd like to mention, actually, if you get a chance, watch the movie Taking Chance. It's a very good movie. It's very authentic into what happened with us. And I can't tell you enough about the Army casualty officer and him watching every single detail of uniforms, medals, you name it, every tiny little detail. He never missed a beat. It's perfect. And there's also there's a book called A Higher Call. Those of you who like to read, please get the book, A Higher Call. It's about the B-17 that was shot up over Germany, and the ME-109 escorted it back out past the flak. And it's a very interesting book. It tells the bigger and the broader story of the German and the American bomber situation.
Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts to this process. One of the things that the Army casualty officer also did was present Jeff, after the disembarkment at the airport, a pair or the Army aviation wings that Staff Sergeant Hall would have worn on his uniform in World War II. Jeff got a pair of those wings to keep for himself. So they just did a great job in honoring our Staff Sergeant. All right, I think we're going to turn it back over to John. Jeff and I will be here afterwards if you have any other questions.